I woke up in the darkness. The musty, cold smell filled the air. Everything around me was so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding loudly in my chest. I touched my face, drenched in sweat, and realized I was locked in the storage room in the basement. The door was locked from the outside. No windows, no phone. No one knew I was here. And the most painful thing was, I knew who had done this to me. My daughter-in-law. She had locked me in and taken the winning lottery ticket, $100 million. The ticket I had hidden carefully for the past 3 weeks. I couldn't scream. My voice was hoarse from fear. All I could do was bang on the old wooden door over and over, like a madwoman. If someone had told me this story a year ago, I wouldn't have believed them. I was a widowed mother living in a peaceful suburb who enjoyed growing tomatoes, reading books, and listening to the radio. I always believed in goodness, that people might be different, but kindness existed everywhere as long as you were sincere. That's how I lived for over 70 years, until that day. The day it all began, also the day I bought that lottery ticket. It was just a quick stop at my usual gas station after a routine checkup. I wasn't someone who bought lottery tickets regularly, but that day, the clerk was so sweet that I bought one to support her. $1. I slipped it into my wallet and forgot about it. 2 weeks later, while cleaning out my wallet, I saw the ticket still there. I turned on the TV, checked the results. And then, my heart nearly stopped. The numbers on the screen matched the ticket I was holding. I had won $100 million. I sat frozen in the kitchen for nearly an hour. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know whether to be happy or terrified. I wasn't young anymore, dreaming of sports cars or mansions. All I could think about was how to keep things peaceful, how to use this money without turning my life upside down. I decided to keep it a secret, told no one. Not even my son, Brian, the one I loved more than anything. But I wasn't wise enough. I thought I was being careful when I wrapped the ticket in 2 layers of paper and hid it inside an old Bible. I never imagined, in one careless moment, she found it. She, Amanda, Brian's wife, was a woman I never quite understood. From the very first time we met, she gave me a strange feeling. Not because she was impolite, but because she was too cold. Her eyes always looked away when I spoke. Her smile seemed programmed. She wasn't rude, but never warm. I tried. I invited them over for dinner. I gave her my family's peach pie recipe. She only said thank you and never touched it. I told stories from the old days. She just stared at her phone. I didn't blame her. Maybe she was just reserved modern from another generation. But over time, I realized that wasn't it. Amanda didn't want me in Brian's life. Gradually, my son's calls grew shorter. Holiday visits became fewer. I began to feel like an unnecessary presence. And then when the lottery ticket disappeared, I knew she wasn't just cold. She was cruel. That morning, Thanksgiving, Brian called to say they would come over for dinner. I was so happy, I got up at 5 a.m. to prepare the giant roast chicken he loved since childhood. I never suspected it was a trap. I went to the market to buy garlic bread, gone less than 30 minutes, leaving the house keys as usual. When I returned, the house was empty. The door open, my bedroom in disarray, drawers wide open, the ticket gone. I went back to the living room and, bang, I was shoved hard from behind. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I found myself locked in that tiny basement storage room. My body trembled, from fear, from rage, and from not understanding. Why I screamed until my voice was gone. I didn't know what she planned, to claim the prize flea or just make me disappear. About an hour later, I heard the door open. It was Brian. He ran down, shocked, terrified. Someone had called to report something strange at the house. The police arrived at the same time, but Amanda was gone. She had left. I trembled as I told everything. The ticket, being locked up. But do you know what hurt the most? Brian looked at me and asked, "Are you sure, Mom? Maybe you imagined it?" Amanda isn't like that. It felt like my heart was being crushed. I didn't blame him. He loved his wife. But in that moment, I knew I had lost my son all over again in another way. Amanda came back the next day smiling as if nothing had happened. She said she had gone to see a friend unexpectedly. Never mentioned the ticket. I had no proof. No one could prove she took it. I'm not a complicated person. If I were to tell you my life story, there wouldn't be anything particularly special. I was born and raised in the Midwest of the United States, in a working-class family. I married the first man who made me laugh every morning. We spent nearly 40 years together raising our only son, Brian, with everything we had. When my husband passed away from heart disease, it felt as though the world skipped a beat. Everything fell strangely silent. No more heavy leather shoes thudding through the house, no more familiar morning throat clearing. At the time, Brian had just gotten married and immediately offered for me to move in with him and his wife. "The house is big, Mom," he said. "You shouldn't be living alone." I agreed, not because I feared loneliness, but because I knew I was getting old. I didn't want to slip in the kitchen one winter morning and not be found until evening. Brian's house was in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania, not too big, but modern. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard with hydrangeas, a flower I always thought was too delicate for me to care for. I stayed in the downstairs room near the kitchen. Every morning I would wake early, make coffee for the household, and turn on the radio to catch the 6 a.m. news. My pension wasn't much, partly because I hadn't worked full-time for many years, only taking part-time jobs after Brian went to college. But I never complained. I was used to living frugally. As long as I had a hot meal, a few books, and some seeds to plant on the balcony, I felt content. And Amanda, I know what you might be thinking. A mother-in-law living with her daughter-in-law must mean trouble. But it wasn't quite like that. Amanda was a polite woman, at least on the surface. She was courteous, considerate just enough. She always greeted me each morning, always thanked me when I cooked, and never raised her voice or showed disrespect. But some things don't need words to be felt. It was clear to me that Amanda didn't really want me there, not in the obvious hateful way. It was a kind of coldness, as if I were just an old piece of furniture not bothersome enough to throw out, but not something anyone wanted to display either. She never called me Mom, just Mrs. Smith, my late husband's surname. When I shared a story from the past, she'd give a half smile and shift the topic to the news or work. When I made Brian's favorite chicken stew, she'd smile politely, but never touched it, saying she was eating clean. And every time guests came over, she would introduce me as Brian's mother, not my mother-in-law who lives with us. At first, I thought I was just being too sensitive. I wasn't used to living with younger people anymore. Different generations, different habits, different ways of thinking. But then there were things I just couldn't ignore. I overheard phone calls between Amanda and her friends. Once I happened to walk by and heard her say into the phone, "She still lives here." "No, she doesn't pay rent. Brian still sends her money every month. I just don't understand why we have to support someone who doesn't contribute anything." I stood there frozen. I had never asked my son for a single penny. I still covered my own expenses with my pension. I even chipped in on the utility bills every month. But in her eyes, I was a burden I didn't tell Brian. I didn't want to put him in a difficult position. I thought as long as I kept to myself, caused no trouble, everything would be fine. I always believed, as long as Brian still came home each night, as long as he still hugged me and said, "I love you, Mom," then I could endure Amanda's cold stares. But people can change, or worse, be manipulated. Over the past year, Brian talked to me less and less. He was always busy, or in a meeting, or on a deadline. Dinners slowly became a table for 2. Sometimes they ate out without inviting me. I still cooked, for myself. Still cleaned the kitchen, out of habit. The truth is, I never thought Amanda was a bad person. I just thought she didn't know how to love. But then that lottery ticket, something so harmless, revealed a different side of her. I don't know how she found out where it was. Maybe she saw me checking the results. Maybe she watched me hide it. I'm not sure. All I know is when money enters a relationship, hearts begin to change. And in that house, once a home, I slowly became the extra piece. The day I was locked in the storage room wasn't the first time I felt lonely in my own family. It was just the breaking point, a final act that made it clear, no matter how long I live, how much I sacrifice, I could still be erased over a single piece of paper, even if that paper was a winning ticket. If you've ever lived in someone else's home and felt like you didn't belong, you'll understand how I feel. There is nothing more frightening than becoming a guest in your own life. The lottery ticket, the beginning of the end. It was just a regular visit to the familiar gas station after my routine health checkup. I walked there every month for a bit of exercise and to get my blood pressure checked for free. The doctor said I was doing well for my age, just needed to watch my diet and avoid overthinking. On the way home, I stopped by the usual store, the one with the curly-haired cashier who always smiled as sweetly as spring sunshine. She asked me, as she always did, "Trying your luck today, Mrs. Smith?" I smiled and nodded, not because I believed in luck, but because sometimes you need a small reason to make an ordinary day feel different. $1. I pulled it from my wallet, took the ticket, and tucked it into the inner pocket where I kept old receipts and childhood photos of Brian. And then I forgot all about it. 2 weeks later, on a drizzly afternoon, I was tidying my wallet. By chance, I came across the ticket, still crisp, the numbers clearly printed as if waiting to be noticed. I turned on the TV, not expecting much. A replay of the lottery draw was on. I checked each number. The first number matched. I chuckled. The second matched, too. I frowned, gripping the remote tighter. The third, fourth, and then all 6 numbers. I fell silent. There was not a single sound in the house, only the steady tick-tock of the wall clock, rhythmic, as if confirming that this moment was real. I had won. $100 million. I sat in the armchair by the window where I usually read the paper every afternoon, but this time I didn't read. I just watched the raindrops slide down the glass, clutching the ticket tightly in case it disappeared. No one knew, no one saw, and in that very moment I didn't know whether I should be happy or afraid. I've never been someone who lived for money. I've seen enough of life to know that money can buy comfort but not peace. And yet now, this flimsy piece of paper could change everything. I didn't tell anyone, not the neighbors, not the elderly friends from the book club, and especially not Brian or Amanda, not because I doubted my son. Brian was a good boy, though. Now he was a busy man, sometimes distant. But I knew once the subject of money entered the picture, everything would change. I needed time, to think, to make a plan. Maybe I would split the money into 3 parts. 1 part in the bank to care for myself for the rest of my life, without burdening anyone. 1 part for charity. I had always wanted to help children in orphanages. And the rest, I'd leave for Brian and any future grandchildren. But first I needed to hide the ticket somewhere safe. I didn't have a safe and I wasn't familiar with using digital accounts. So I chose the old-fashioned way. I wrapped the ticket in 2 layers of paper, tucked it into an old Bible, the one I read every night before bed, and placed it in my bedside drawer. I thought no one would touch it. Amanda didn't care for books, and my room was usually considered a private space. But I was wrong. At some point, Amanda started paying more attention to me. She would ask if I needed anything, if I was feeling well, even made breakfast, something she had never done before. At first, I thought she was trying to improve our relationship. I hoped so. Until one afternoon, I came home earlier than expected because the bakery ran out of ingredients. I noticed my room was slightly off. Not clearly disturbed, just that the blanket was folded a bit differently, the drawer slightly ajar. But that feeling, I couldn't shake it. I checked. The Bible was still there. But the paper wrapping the ticket had new creases. My heart went cold. I wasn't sure Amanda knew, but a mother's intuition, especially one forged over decades, rarely fails. I pretended everything was normal, still woke early, still cooked, still did my Friday shopping. But inside I was uneasy. And then Thanksgiving came. Brian said he and Amanda would come home for dinner. I was so happy. It was the first time in months I felt like I was still part of the family. I woke at 5 a.m. to prepare Brian's favorite dish. Before lunch, I went to the bakery to pick up the pre-ordered pumpkin pie. I didn't expect that in just 30 minutes a disaster would unfold. When I returned, my bedroom door was wide open. The nightstand drawer was pulled out. The Bible opened to a random page, not how I had left it. And the lottery ticket was gone. I didn't have time to react before a hard shove from behind knocked me to the floor. Everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I found myself locked in the basement storage room. No phone, no light. No one knew I was there. I screamed, pounded the door, used every ounce of strength I had, but it was no use. The only things with me were terror and betrayal. I don't know how long I was down there, an hour, two, maybe more. Eventually, Brian returned, opened the door, and found me curled up in the corner, my hands bruised from banging too hard. I told him everything, every detail, and when Brian looked at me, his eyes were filled with confusion. I understood. It's not easy to believe that the woman you love could do something like this. Mom, are you sure you're not just tired and imagining things Amanda said she was just out getting the pie? I didn't say anything else. Moments later, Amanda walked in as if nothing had happened. She carried a large cake, set it on the table, and smiled. Have you tried the pumpkin pie this year? Mom, the new bakery makes it really well. I looked at her. I didn't answer. Later, Amanda came into my room, holding a small key. She set it on the table and tilted her head, eyes glinting in an eerie way. Do you like the lake house I bought for you, Mom? I looked at the key, then at the woman standing in front of me. She was no longer the daughter-in-law I thought I knew if I ever truly knew her. It was the look of someone who had won, not in love, but in a ruthless game I never even realized I was playing. You might think that someone like me, a 70-year-old woman, frugal and a bit old-fashioned, couldn't possibly anticipate anything serious. I used to think that too. But age has taught me one thing sometimes: to survive, you have to be even more careful than the young. And after all these years of living, I no longer believe in coincidence. When I won the lottery, my first instinct was to stay silent, but immediately after came the instinct to protect myself. I'd heard too many stories on the news where people fought tooth and nail over every lottery dollar, even turning against their own flesh and blood. I didn't want to become a headline, so I marked the ticket. I remember clearly the day I bought it, a Friday with mild sunshine. After receiving the ticket from the friendly clerk at my usual gas station, I went home. While making tea, I remembered the UV ink pen that Brian had given me for my birthday a few years ago. It was used for marking belongings, a tech novelty I thought I'd never need. I took out the pen and carefully wrote the first 3 letters of my real name on the back of the ticket. Then I wrote down the date and time of purchase on a small slip of paper, clipped it together with the receipt from that day, placed them all in a white envelope, and hid it in my old Bible on the nightstand. At the time, I thought maybe I was being overly suspicious. But now, looking back, if I hadn't done that, I might have lost everything. After being locked away after the ticket disappeared, after Amanda acted as if nothing had happened, I still kept quiet. Because I knew if she was greedy enough to do this, she wouldn't stop at intimidation or theft. She would try to claim the prize, and that's when the truth would come out. And just as I predicted, less than 48 hours later, she showed up at a state lottery claims center, not the local one, but the main office nearly 3 hours from home. But Amanda didn't know one thing: my ticket had been specially flagged in the system at the time of purchase. The receipt from that gas station contained a transaction code directly linked to the ticket, and even if she held it, the system still required the purchaser's identity to be verified. She was neatly dressed, lightly made up, wearing that smile I knew too well, the one meant to convince. But when the clerk asked, "Do you have the receipt for the ticket, ma'am? This is a high-value claim, so we need additional verification," Amanda began to hesitate. I lost it, but this is the ticket I've been holding on to for days." One staff member suggested checking the gas station's security footage. Coincidentally, that station had clear cameras aimed directly at the transaction counter. And then they saw the person in the footage wasn't Amanda. It was me, an old woman with silver hair, wearing a purple cardigan, carrying my fabric tote bag printed with Smith's Garden Club. It didn't stop there. Fingerprint analysis on the ticket revealed only one primary set: mine. Amanda began to change her story. I was holding it for my mother-in-law. She asked me to claim it for her. At that point, the lottery staff insisted on directly contacting the rightful owner. Amanda froze. Call me she didn't dare. They told her the claim would be delayed pending further verification, and temporarily confiscated the ticket. Realizing she couldn't hide the truth, Amanda left the office, her face pale. The incident wasn't made public. It was treated as an internal matter between the customer and the lottery authority. But they called me, verified all the details: purchase code, the markings on the ticket, the time description, and most importantly, the security footage. I confirmed everything, and they scheduled me to come in and finalize the claim the following week. I didn't say a word to Amanda. I just waited. I wanted to see would she face the truth or keep playing her act until the end. That evening, Brian came home earlier than usual. He called me into the living room, his voice filled with uncertainty. Amanda told me to ask you about the lottery ticket. I looked at my son. He looked exhausted, as if he had just endured a battle of wills he never wanted to fight. I knew he was trapped between two women, one his mother, one his wife. I nodded. Then I opened my drawer and took out the white envelope containing a copy of the receipt, a photo of the security footage sent by the lottery office, and the fingerprint verification results. I handed them to him one by one without saying a word. Brian stayed silent for a long time. His eyes moved slowly over each document. When he reached the security footage, his hands trembled slightly. "Mom, were you really locked in the basement?" I didn't answer. He turned away, tears welling in his eyes, though he fought to keep them from falling. The next morning, Amanda was gone. She left a short note, no apology, no explanation, just saying this was all a misunderstanding and I need time to think. Brian didn't say much. He just stood at the doorway looking out at the patch of yard where I grew tomatoes every summer and quietly said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't feel joy that the truth had come out. I didn't feel vindicated that my daughter-in-law had left. I just felt relief, like a storm had passed, leaving behind a mess I now had to slowly clean up. The lottery ticket at this point was no longer the goal. It had become evidence not only of wrongdoing, but of what greed can reveal in a person's heart. The day I went to claim the prize, Brian came with me. He drove the 3-hour trip in silence. When we arrived, he held my hand tightly, just like when he was a boy afraid of the dark. They congratulated me. They asked what I would do with the money. I smiled without hesitation. "I'll buy a small house by the lake, and a good rocking chair to sit and read every afternoon." I don't quite know how to describe the feeling I had when I received that check. In the pristine white room of the state lottery headquarters, when the staff handed me the check worth $100 million, I didn't feel like I had won. I felt like I had survived a storm of the human heart. I stood there, silver-haired, slightly trembling hands, posing for a commemorative photo with the lottery representative. Everyone clapped, all smiles, but inside me only one thought kept echoing. I don't need $100 million to be happy. I just need a family that's truly sincere. When I returned home, Brian had already cleaned up the upstairs bedroom, his old room from when he was still in school. The house suddenly felt quieter. No more high heels clacking. No more lingering scent of expensive perfume in the hallway. Amanda was gone. She left behind many things, clothes, handbags, even some furniture I had never even sat on. But the one thing she didn't leave behind was an apology. Brian didn't speak of divorce, but I knew he had made his decision. One morning I saw him holding the papers, quietly setting them down on the table. He said I trusted the wrong person. But luckily, I still have you, Mom. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't lost everything. As for me, after claiming the prize, I hired a private lawyer and an accountant to help divide the assets. I've lived simply all my life, so I don't need millions to spend. What I need is meaning. I divided the money into 5 parts. The first part, I used to buy a small wooden house by a lake in the northern suburbs. Not the house gifted by Amanda, but one I chose and designed myself. A house with large windows overlooking the water, a rocking chair on the porch, and a warm kitchen that reminded me of my younger days. Brian moved in with me. In the mornings, he brews coffee for the both of us. At night, we have dinner, play chess, and listen to music, things we had forgotten how to do years ago. The second part I donated to the local high school where Brian studied. I set up a scholarship fund in my late husband's name, the Walter Smith Memorial Fund, to help underprivileged children access college education. The third part, I used to build a community home, a row of small, fully equipped houses for elderly people who are alone and have nowhere to go. I named the place Mother's House because I believe everyone deserves a place to call home, no matter their age. The fourth part I dedicated to the local community funding the public library. Contributing to park renovations, providing free weekend meals for the homeless. I didn't do these things for praise. I did them because I know how painful it is to feel forgotten. The final part I kept for myself. Not much. Just enough to live peacefully without worry about illness or medical bills. I never wanted to be rich. I just wanted to have a choice. My new life isn't without its quiet moments. Sometimes I still dream of that day I was locked in the dark room. Still startle when I hear a door slam shut. But then I open my eyes, see sunlight streaming through the window, hear the gentle waves lapping at the lake shore, and smell the faint aroma of fresh coffee wafting through the wooden hallway. And I feel my heart settle again. Happiness in the end doesn't lie in a bank account. It lies in the small things we once thought we'd lost and are lucky enough to find again. Amanda never came back. Some say she moved to another state, now working in a real estate company. I don't care. I don't hate her. But I don't forgive her either, because some things a simple apology isn't enough for. Once during an interview with a local newspaper, a young journalist asked me, "Do you regret anything? If you could go back to that day, would you have told your family sooner?" I looked at the young man, then smiled. No. Because if I had said something too soon, I wouldn't have known who truly counted as family. There are those who stand by you when you have nothing, and those who only show up when you have everything. I didn't need $100 million to learn that. I just needed a dark room and the silence of betrayal. Now every afternoon I sit by the lake holding an old book, sometimes a cup of tea, sometimes a half-finished knitted scarf. Brian often sits beside me holding his guitar, strumming old songs from his rebellious teenage years. We don't talk much, but the silence between two people who truly care is always the warmest kind. You know, something money can light up a house, but it can't warm a cold heart. There are those who, for a few numbers on a lottery ticket, are willing to sell their conscience, abandon family, and trample over the most sacred things. But in the end, they always pay the price. There are those who trade away their morals for money, and they always pay the price.